Hey y'all, this is Auntie Flax, and this is part one of my detailed glute series. So first and foremost, I want to explain how I broke this out. I decided to break this out into separate videos. I was gonna do it all at once originally, but then I realized that video was gonna take forever to make, and it's gonna be super long for you guys to watch. So I'm actually gonna break it down, I think maybe into like 4 or 5 different parts. First and foremost, I'm gonna start off with activation, which is what this video is gonna be about. So just in case you're not here from TikTok, just to give you a little bit of background, I was truly one of those people that felt like everything I did, and I tried everything, nothing worked. I mean, I could not grow great glutes to save my life. I honestly spent about probably like 2 or 3 years trying everything and nothing worked. And then one day it kind of hit me that I feel like maybe these things aren't working because influencers or like articles, publications, whatever it may be that I was getting all my advice on, they don't really give you those small details that actually make a difference. So just to give you like a quick example of what I mean, I remember everyone was like, right, every influencer's like, lift heavy, eat a lot of food. And I was like, but what is heavy? Because like, I don't know, to me 10 pounds could be heavy, but for you 50 pounds could be heavy. And to another person, like 100 pounds could be heavy. So like, what does heavy mean, right? Just little stuff like that where I felt like people were kind of maybe not on purposely doing this, but you know, on purposefully, okay, so maybe on purposely, but not really telling you the exact small details of what really helped them grow. I think, you know, not to go into like a whole thing, but I think a lot of days influencers don't really tell you everything, and they only give you like 70% of the information. And to me, it's just like this weird game where it's like, if they figured out how to actually do it, then they wouldn't need you anymore. And so they don't really tell you the whole truth. So with all that being said, one day I was like, okay, I need to try to figure this out on my own because everything that everyone is telling me is not working, or I'm just really confused, or they don't really tell me exactly what to do, whatever. And just for more context, y'all, like my butt was so small that it would hurt to sit on hard surfaces for too long, which is kind of embarrassing to admit, but it was that bad. And I would always like stand in the middle of group pictures so I wouldn't have to be on the side so my butt didn't show. I mean, it was just a lot of insecurities that came with it. And I'll be completely honest with y'all, East Asian women in particular, their genetics are not very favorable for this type of body type. So there was even a point where I was like starting to hate my like heritage, my own genetics, which is crazy, right? Well, anyways, long story short, this is exactly what worked for me. And if you guys have any questions, if I don't cover something, or if you guys want me to be more clear, please, please, please feel free to let me know. I want to put a disclaimer, y'all, that I am absolutely by no means a professional. I'm not certified in anything. I don't do personal training. This is just a hobby of mine, and this is what I found works for me. So again, I have no expertise in this, and if someone tells you, like if your personal trainer or a physical therapist or whatever tells you not to do something, don't do it. All right, so let's talk about activation. For me, activation was probably single-handedly one of the most important things on how I grew my glutes. The reason that I think activation was really, really important for me, especially like during those beginning stages when I truly had nothing, is because I really couldn't understand the mind to muscle connection. I also had really small glutes, so the burn, I didn't really feel as much. And because of that, it really made it hard for me to activate the muscles without exercises. I'm noticing now that as my glutes are growing, right, and they're getting bigger, it is way easier for me to activate them with my mind. But let's talk about that really quickly, because I think that's one of the most important aspects of lifting and growing your muscles, right? This mind and muscle activation. I'm not gonna lie, y'all, when people were like, just focus on the muscle, I was like, I am focusing on the muscle. I am focusing on this muscle, but nothing is happening. And that was pretty much like the only advice that I saw out there was just focus on the muscle, like, you'll feel it. And I'm like, no, I'm doing it, nothing's happening. I'm honestly convinced that it's harder for us to focus on our muscles if our muscles are smaller, but whatever. So the way I figured out how I can actually focus on my muscle is actually by touching it, which I know sounds a little bit weird, but this is what it looks like in practice, right? So say you're working out some muscle, let's just say the bicep because it's easier to show. What I would actually do is touch the muscle, like as I'm doing the workout. And I don't know what it is. I think it's the actual physical touch being kind of a cue for my mind that allows me to focus on the actual muscle. So another way to think about this, right, is if I told you right now to focus on your right shoulder with no cue, right? Try doing it. Okay, probably not getting much, right? But if I'm like, hey, you know what, put your finger on your right shoulder, you can instantly think about it. Like, why has no one talked about that? Why has no one shared that? Or am I like the only one that has this problem? I don't know. So pretty much for any type of exercise where I couldn't feel my glutes or my muscle or whatever it was, and I was having a really hard time with the mind connection, I would start touching it while I was doing it. That way I could actually feel the muscle and have my mind connected to it. And it helped so much. And I promise y'all, I'll actually show you all the exercises that I did when I was first starting out to get to where I am. But first, I just want to go over these little things that maybe some people might be a little bit confused about, like I was. Another issue that I had was people kept saying, hey, stand shoulder width apart. And I don't know if I am just stupid or if I overthink things, but I was like, what is shoulder width apart? Like, where does my shoulders technically start? Where do they end? Because I had this impression that this was my shoulders and this was my shoulders. And I'm like, that's a very different way to stand. So one day I started playing around with my footing, which I know sounds pretty weird, but then I figured out if I do stand around my shoulder width length and start moving my feet around, I can actually feel where my heels dig into the ground most. So here's an example, y'all, of what I'm talking about, right? You're standing shoulder width apart, and then I literally like move around. It sounds so weird, but I move around and there's a spot where I am, and it's actually right here, where I feel it the most, right down there, like in my heels. They're like dug into the ground, and it's below my shoulders, but I can really feel it. I personally found that this is where my glutes were engaged the most. And I think the reasoning is because think about all these compounded movements, right? Like a deadlift, squat, hip thrust, a lot of these common glute compound movements. You are told to dig your heels into the ground to feel your glutes. So I think when your heels are the most planted into the ground, you know, because you just moved them around, so now you feel sturdy, it's a lot easier to do so. The last thing I really want to quickly go over before I actually jump into the exercises is the way you do a rep. I think when you're a beginner like me, you see someone doing a movement, right? And they're like, do this for a big butt. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna do that exact same thing. But the problem is, as an example, right? If you're doing a fire hydrant and you see someone's entire leg go up to the side, you mimic that, right? So for me, I was like, all right, they lifted their leg to the side. If I lift my leg to the side, I'm gonna feel it in my glutes. Now, this might go without saying, and I just might be silly and a little stupid, but for me, that was my understanding. I lift my leg, I feel it in my glutes. All these exercises, people are engaging their butts, right? Their glutes, and they're lifting with their glutes versus they're lifting their legs and feeling it in their glutes. So pretty much what I'm trying to say is that when I would see an exercise, I would mimic the actual behavior that they were doing. Example again, lifting the leg from the side, lifting their leg from behind, whatever it was. Instead of realizing that they're lifting from their glutes and their legs are also moving up with it. All right, let's get to the fun stuff, the actual exercises. So the exercises I chose were the ones that I felt the most engagement in my glutes starting off. There are honestly a whole lot of different things that you can do. These are just personally what worked best for me. I'm a very firm believer on if I don't like to do something, I won't do it, or I will find a way to not do it. So I try to find the activation exercises that worked best for me, that I actually enjoyed and hit all aspects of my glutes. All right, y'all, so without further ado, here are the actual exercises that I did to grow my glutes in terms of activation, and I'll try to put them right here. I realized I don't know how to edit, so that's gonna be an interesting journey, but if I don't put it right here, I will make sure to put it on the bottom so y'all can screenshot it. So I start off with the banded squats, and you're actually gonna notice that in all these exercises, I do not use any weights. For me personally, when I was beginning, I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really understand the right form, and anytime that I would put weights on, yes, I would feel the burn more, but I noticed my form was kind of giving out, and because of it, my lower back would hurt. So for me personally, I don't use any weights when doing activation exercises, and I really focus on getting the form right. So I start off with these banded squats. And when I'm doing this, again, right, you're about shoulder width apart, making sure that you find that area where your heels dig in the most. For me, when I'm going down, always brace your core, right, because we don't want to hurt our back. And as I'm going down, I really focus on driving my heels down and then pushing my knees out. That's really where I feel the most engagement. And it's almost like the best way someone described this to me, because when I was first beginning, I was like, I don't even know how to do a squat, is it's a motion of, you're almost like sitting down, right? You're almost sitting down like there's a chair behind you. And for me, like I like to go pretty slow. The reasoning is because I wanna feel it all in my glutes. So just really making sure that I'm going slow down. And then once I'm at the bottom, I notice if I do too many full reps, right? So going from all the way from the top, standing up, down to a squat, I noticed that my quads would start burning a lot too. And as much as I want my quads to grow, I really want to focus on activating that muscle. So I actually like to pulse at the bottom once it starts to burn. So usually about like 5 or 6 reps in, I notice that my whole legs are starting to burn. And so I'll stay down at the bottom in that down seated squat position and pulse. And this is just a personal thing that I've noticed. I've noticed if I use a band around my quads that are too tight, then it becomes almost hard for me to squat, and then my knees start caving in, and then I feel it more in my quads. So I actually like to use kind of like a medium resistance when doing these. So next I do these side squats. I do it both on the left and right side. One thing to note is that if I'm going to the right, then my right foot is actually a little bit forward than my left foot. Vice versa, right? If I'm squatting to the left, my left foot is a little bit forward than my right foot. And I just noticed personally that that footing position makes it easier to feel the tension in my glutes. And I do the same exact thing that I do on my normal squats as well, which is really making sure that I stay down and pulse. One thing I noticed about glute bridges is that a lot of influencers do it wrong, which is really, really alarming because it's really bad for your back. But I, probably like you, have seen a million influencers do it, and I copied the exact way they did it. And then I was like, why is my lower back hurting so bad? It's super effective, right? I really do feel it in my glutes, but my lower back is starting to hurt. So then I realized they're actually doing it wrong. So one big thing to note here is really make sure your core is braced. You do not have to lift up your entire butt and back like they do. Just a little bit is more than fine, as you can see here. And then another thing to note is I'm actually pushing my legs out. So a few things about the donkey kickback. I talked about this a little bit in my TikTok video, but because of the way elasticity and bands work, it actually doesn't make sense to go the full range of 0 to 100, right? 0 being where your leg is on the ground, 100 being when your leg is all the way up. And the reason is, it's because that's really not how it works, right? You don't really feel anything in that 0. Honestly, for me, probably like 40% range. And then at the very top, at the 100 as well, when the band is all the way extended, you're also not gonna feel it there. So for me, I really focus on making sure that when I'm doing these, going from a 50% to like 95% range. That way your glutes are always in maximum tension. Another big thing with donkey kickbacks that I noticed is that my back would start hurting really bad. And I realized it was because I wasn't bracing my core. I think a lot of people don't really talk about bracing your core during activation and really talk about it during compounded movements, but it's also really important in activation because you don't want to hurt your back. So another thing with donkey kickbacks is where I placed my band really made a difference between feeling it in my glutes versus feeling it kind of in my whole leg and quads. I personally noticed that whatever knee was planted on the ground, right? So if my right leg is going up, then my left knee is on the ground. Where I put the band on that left knee really mattered. So I noticed that if I put it more towards the ground, right? More towards my kneecap, that's where I actually felt the most tension in my glutes. And like I mentioned before, this was one of those exercises when I was first beginning. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna lift my leg because they're lifting your leg and they feel in their glutes. But really just making sure to lift with your glutes and not your leg. So next up, we have the fire hydrants. Same exact concept, y'all. Make sure to brace your core, make sure to lift with your butt and not your legs. And then for me personally, I go about, I would say like a 20% to 95% range in motion. The reasoning is, I don't know why, but these are really hard for me. I can maybe get like 5 reps in. And just because they're a little bit harder, I can actually feel the tension earlier. So for kneeling squats, I actually used to do these all the time and I wouldn't really feel anything. And then just from trial and error, I figured out personally what works well for me. So for me personally, when I'm setting up, I'm making sure that the band is pretty much on my knees. Like it is right above my kneecap. pretty much as low as I can go between my quads and my kneecap, right? And I find that if I use a tighter resistant band, I actually feel it a lot more. As much as I really like the banded knee squats, I noticed that this is probably one of the hardest ones for me to engage my glutes, especially in the beginning when I didn't really know what I was doing. So here's just some helpful tips that I found. And again, this is like my personal trial and error, so it might not work for everyone, but this is just personally what worked for me. So first and foremost, where you put the band. I actually put the band pretty much right above my kneecap and then under the beginning of my quads. So really, it's very low. It's almost right above the mat or floor or whatever you're on. And then another big thing that I do is really making sure that my knees are spread apart as much as possible. I mean, that band is being tugged. And then one thing that I will say is in terms of the actual band, I notice that the harder the resistance is in the band, the more I feel it. With certain exercises, I don't really think you need the most tightest or heaviest band or hardest resistance, whatever you want to call it. But in this scenario, I do find that it's really helpful. And then another big thing is when people do this, I noticed personally that people were going really fast. They were going down really fast, and when they would come back up, they would thrust. And I think there's this misconception that people think you're supposed to feel it on the way back up, right? Which is why they do that thrust. But you actually feel it when you're going down. So you should be doing this really slow, right? So your knees are apart now, right? You have the band right above the kneecap. You're in a great position to start. I like to lean forward a little bit, lean my body weight forward, and that's only because it really helps me dig my knees in, which is a thing you want to do, right? So you're digging your knees in, I'm moving forward. So the question you guys are probably thinking is, how many reps and sets did you do? This is really hard for me to answer, to be quite honest with you, because I think I might think a little bit differently than other people, but the way I think about reps and sets is a little bit different. I know a lot of people say like 15 reps of 4 sets. Like I think that's pretty much the most common used one. But for me personally, I noticed that if I did that and say I did, I don't know, donkey kicks, and I did 15 and my glutes were kind of burning, but not really, I would convince myself to stop at 15 because I told myself 15, right? That's the whole point is for it to burn. Instead, I focused more on, hey, let me see how many I can do till I start to burn. And then once I burn and feel like I want to stop and give up, I want to do 5 or 6 more. And for me, when I was first starting out, I would really destroy my glutes during activation. And the reasoning behind this is because when I was first starting out, again, I had no glutes. So I really couldn't lift heavy, even though I wanted to. I really wanted to, but I think at one point I could only do like 30 pounds hip thrusting. Like it was bad. And so for me, I wanted to make sure I was still getting a good burn. And I noticed that when I first didn't have any glutes, it was a lot easier for me to feel the burn and burn out on activation exercises and then take it one step further with lifting. Nowadays, because my glutes are a lot bigger and there's more muscle and I can lift a lot heavier, I hardly do activation exercises, to be honest with y'all. But I think, again, when you're first starting out and you don't have a lot of glute muscles, it is really hard to lift heavy, and especially with good form. And so for me, for that reason, I really focused on those activation exercises where I could do an easier burnout without giving up. And I think, honestly, the reason why that's not really talked about a lot is because, one, I think a lot of people that are, influencers or in a position of power to kind of relay these messages, had something to work with. A lot of people aren't as flat as I was. I don't know how to say it. Like, I just have really nothing. And so I think I sympathize more with people who truly don't have anything, because it's a lot harder for us to be told to lift heavy when you have nothing to work with, right? So I really worked up on my activation exercises and lifting versus mainly lifting a little bit of activation. Thanks for watching, y'all, and I promise to keep the series going, especially as I learn more too. But just bear with me a little bit. I'm a little bit short on time in my own life right now. There's just like a million things going on where it's really hard for me to mentally be in many places at once. So just bear with me, y'all. I promise I'll get them out. And if this was helpful, like and subscribe. Thanks, y'all.